this segment, we're going to continue our discussion about accountability by going over the types of accountability that managers so often find themselves having to deal with in their roles. Specifically, we're going to discuss tactical accountability, developmental accountability, and the differences between the two.
What I've done through my work is sort of pull apart those kinds of conversations that are some are easier and some are more difficult depending on your perspective, right? So I'm going to break them up into two categories, and I have them listed as tactical accountability and then developmental accountability. Tactical accountability are those things that managers hold people accountable to that don't require a lot of pre-work, if you will, on the count of the manager. So let me list what I'm talking about. Tactical accountability are things like rules, policies, sort of those non-negotiables that everybody in the organization knows. When we're using or applying tactical accountability, there's usually a short window for improvement expected of the employee. So for example, being late to work is tactical accountability. You have scheduled work hours. You're supposed to be in the office at 8. You're not supposed to go home till 5. If an employee continually comes in at 8:30 or 9, that's a tactical accountability conversation. That's a, hey, you've been here late 4 times this week. It has to stop, right? There's a short window of improvement time. We don't think that's a big skill set that someone has to learn. That's just get better. Come to work on time, right? Tactical accountability generally calls upon a directive management approach, which means I am the manager, you are the employee. I am going to tell you what you need to do to fix it. So we're not doing a lot of development. It's just very directive. This isn't really focused on improving skills or behaviors. This is really just, you can't come to work late anymore. You need to rectify that situation, right? And lastly, this tactical accountability requires very limited effort on the part of the manager because it's usually so overt and so obvious, right? People who are late to work, people who are misusing company resources, people who are behaving in a way in the workplace that is flagrantly a violation of a company policy. These are just immediately addressed tactical accountability issues, okay? Those are requirements of any manager. You have to be able to have those conversations, and you can't get all caught up in it, right? It's like, I got to talk to someone about being late to work. I need to address it. I will hold them accountable for whether or not they come to work on time moving forward. It's not complicated, I guess, is the easiest way to sort of summarize tactical accountability. Developmental accountability is the other half of this, and this one is more complicated. This one, developmental accountability, is first and foremost about holding our employees accountable to the expectations that we've set. So you recall that we set those expectations in our previous module, and expectations are really guidelines for behaviors and values that we all hold as a member of the team. So if one of my expectations is to be honest, right, which I used, I believe, in that module, and then I find out that I have someone on my team who maybe is fudging the truth a little bit. Maybe they're not overtly lying, but they're exaggerating. Now, that's not a policy that I can hold them accountable to, right? But if I have communicated my expectations, I've documented them, everybody has them, I can have that conversation with that employee and say, I understand that yesterday when we met, you exaggerated your position or your experience. And you may recall that one of the expectations that I have of people on my team is that we are honest with one another. Exaggerating or, puffing up your answer is dishonest, and that's unacceptable on this team. That kind of conversation is a developmental accountability conversation, okay? Coaching is developmental accountability. Knowing that not just that I'm going to meet with you and talk to you about what you need to do every week or every month. That's a briefing. Coaching is, here's the things that I know you want to get done, you need to get done. Let's look at what you're going to need to make that happen and how can I help you improve. It's a collaborative management approach. So instead of it being directive, which is what I outlined in the tactical accountability, collaborative management approach sees the partnership between you and the employee and gives the employee as much opportunity to make change as you are requesting of them, right? This requires a lot more effort from you as the manager. This is not just point to a policy and say you can't do this anymore. This is you being engaged and involved and having a substantive conversation. There is always going to be a longer window for improvement here. So if I am working with someone who has a tendency to exaggerate the facts, that could be a behavior that they've had since they were 7 years old. And no one's ever really held them accountable to changing that behavior. So it's probably not something that will happen overnight, but if I'm invested in this employee, I can probably help them make that change, assuming they're invested as well. And so this really is about developing performance over time and creating a sustainable performance organization over time. The tactical accountability is addressing something that happened today, needs to stop, needs to change, needs to get better. Developmental accountability is identifying something that isn't going well, that we need to work on, and that we're going to continue to build a plan to do that. And then ultimately, when that skill or behavior changes, that performance becomes much more sustainable. So those are the two key areas I always see as it relates to accountability. And I will tell you that managers sort of tend to fall one way or the other in terms of what they're more comfortable with. Some managers are very comfortable with tactical accountability, but not developmental accountability. And the opposite can be true. Some are very comfortable with the developmental conversations, but they're not comfortable with those direct, don't be late to work kinds of conversations. There's no right or wrong. But what I wanted to do is put these out for you as managers so you can kind of start to determine like which ones really resonate for me, which ones might I need to work on to help me be more effective with my team overall. In summary, this video, we talked about tactical versus developmental accountability, which really those are the two areas when we're talking about performance development that we tend to look at most as managers. First, tactical accountability is when an employee breaks a rule or a policy, something very rigid, very measurable. Typically, there's a very short window for improvement because it's not a coaching thing. It's just hey, you were late. You need to get to work on time. And it calls upon managers to have sort of a directive management style, to tell more, and which ultimately requires less work for the manager. We're not looking for a lot of time invested here with the employee or a lot of reflection that we're trying to help the employee have. It's just very directed. Developmental accountability, on the other hand, is when we're holding people more accountable to expectations and those harder to learn skill sets that really drive performance. So there's always going to be a longer window for improvement here, and it's up to us to collaborate with the employee to make a plan to see that kind of change. And it's a very collaborative exercise. Managers are involved, the employee is involved, and there's a lot more engagement here from both parties, the manager and the employee. There's a lot of work for the manager to do a lot of coaching, and there's a lot of work for the employee to do to improve performance. So as you think about how you interact with your employees, you want to keep in mind, do you default to one or the other? Do you use both equally, or do you need some help with both?